Hi, my name is Abhishek Clifford and we're doing this series on cyber ethics, and today I want to talk about the irresponsible sexual behaviour and health implications for different sorts of relationship, especially those that are advertised in internet pornography. Specifically, I'm speaking about anal and oral sexual activities. First of all, when people watch these things, they have to see the parts of someone who is the opposite gender. And obviously there's a consequence of continuously in an ecstatic state seeing this. Promiscuity is inspired by pornography, as we looked at previous sessions, and also paedophilia, because of the average age of the porn star is getting younger and younger. So let's look at the health implications of these things. Okay, every year the Center of Disease Control in America, where people are more open about disclosing their sexual orientation, are published. And whilst America is approximately 2% gay or homosexual, they constitute 56% of the cases of HIV/AIDS. And so we can calculate that someone who engages in anal sex is 140 times more likely to get HIV. Similarly, they constitute 83% of the cases of syphilis. And there's about 30 sexually transmitted diseases which are causing havoc today in the world and taking young people's lives, especially young people. And so it's important to point out the consequences of this sort of relationship. Whether the person is male or female isn't the issue, it's the anal and the oral nature of sexual relationships which are advertised day and night on pornography, which people assume to be okay, which is inspiring people. Guys are forcing their girlfriend to want to do this, wives who are saying, no way, I'm not going to do that. And the husband is saying, well, I'll leave you. Or the boyfriend will say, I'm leaving you unless you're willing to do it in that way. We need to look carefully at this issue. And of course it overlaps with the whole issue of IPC section 377 and people's rights to freedom or not. The Supreme Court recently overturned a ruling of the Delhi High Court and said, no, we stand with IPC section 377, which says no anal or oral sex, and therefore no sexual relationships between the same gender, and therefore recriminalizing homosexual relationships. And we want to talk about this tenderly. We don't want to inspire bad feeling against people who find themselves with a reversed orientation, but we do want to point out the medical implications of such relationships. Because of experimentation, people looking at porn will try it out, what they see. There was multiple newspaper articles about claiming that ladies in India, their favourite pornography was lesbian and homosexual pornography, and what you see and enjoy, may change your behaviour. There's lots of evidence that shows the advertising industry works. You see smoking, you desire to do smoking, so smoking is banned. And in the same way, it seems that pornography is inspiring people to try out these sorts of behaviours, these sorts of gender alignments, and dissatisfaction, the reduction in attraction between a committed relationship because of porn is leading people to want to try something more weird or something different for example, same gender. So let's look at these carefully. 35 out of the 45 largest countries will not take blood from men who've had sex with other men because of the documented health implications. This is not a homophobic statement. Even on lesbian websites, they warn of the dangers of same-gender relationships because of oral and anal sex. So they say that lesbians are the highest group factor of people that potentially can get breast cancer. Now let's look at why. Why is this? Well, you see, promiscuity is maximum amongst people that have relationships with the same gender. On average, a homosexual will have 50 sleeping partners, or some people would say 50 husbands, although they don't always take the contract of marriage. 43% of homosexuals will have 500 or more sleeping partners, according to recent surveys. And so, because of the promiscuity and the going with multiple partners, that's one reason why the homosexual community is so much more open to these terrible diseases. And it's important to warn young people, some people say, sir, we play with the girls, we play with the boys. Well, you need to know the consequences of what happens if you do play with people of the same gender. Overall, because of this increased promiscuity, the homosexual community will have their lives shortened by 14 years because of the increased risk of sexually transmitted diseases. You see, the anus or the rectum, the backside, is a one-way sewage system. Its sole purpose is expelling toxins. And misusing this part of the body, even though we label it love, does not change the health or medical implications. And how can we allow something to be advertised which is twice as deadly as smoking? Smoking takes 7 years of someone's life. Anal sex, which is the only option for gay couples, it takes, anal or oral, takes 14 years in average of someone's life. We have on television all the time the adverts against smoking. If there's a scene where someone's smoking, there'll be a disclaimer at the beginning: smoking kills. None of the actors in this film advocate smoking. So since we want to warn people of the dangers of smoking, which takes 7 years of someone's life, or 10% suicide, how much more should we want to warn people against anal sex, which takes 14 years of someone's life, or 20% suicide? It's twice as deadly as smoking. Smoking is illegal in public places because of its proven link to lung cancer, and again, taking people's lives en masse. So something twice as deadly as this, we cannot be quiet. We need to educate the emerging generation of the implications. It is not benign. It is a huge health risk. It is very dangerous. It will mess up someone's body and their life. There are huge implications. People don't like to talk about this issue. And when we talk about the issue of, say, homosexuality, we say, well, two guys loving each other, two girls loving each other, what's the problem? Well, if it was just two people loving each other, there's no problem. But because of our embarrassment, we don't actually deal with what we're talking about here. We're talking about a very unhealthy version of the physical or sexual relationship. That's the problem. The government doesn't endorse a marriage because two people love each other. There are millions of teenagers and college students that love each other that are not married, heterosexual. Heterosexual means boy with girl. Homosexual is girl, girl, or boy, boy. And the government doesn't endorse the heterosexual relationship because they love each other. They endorse it because they replenish society. Heterosexual relationship can never be compared with a homosexual relationship. Everyone on the planet today was born out of a heterosexual relationship. No homosexuals ever have procreated or produced babies. So you cannot compare the two relationships. Yes, there are some barren couples, but a lower percentage, and everyone comes from heterosexual despite the barrenness. This is a little embarrassing, but since people today are promoting anal sex and also the possibility of giving freedom to homosexuals and changing the law in India, since they're wanting to bring this up and change the law, we have to talk about what it really is and the health implications. And as I said before, multiple sexually transmitted diseases. Poor homosexuals are 140 plus times the chances of getting these diseases. So that's what we're talking about, a very unhealthy relationship. Some people say, well, what we do in our bedroom, that's none of the government's business. How can what they do inside their four walls? Well, see, it's no longer in private, and it is the government's business. Because 50, 60 years ago, a man in Africa slept with a monkey and contracted AIDS for the first human being. Because of promiscuity, it's spread en masse. Today, almost 1 million people in India every year contract HIV and die of AIDS 7 years later, 6 years later. So it is of public interest to regulate what's allowed sexually. We don't allow in any country bestiality, sleeping with animals, because it's proven linked to bring horrible diseases en masse. Through blood transfusion, even though it's screened, sometimes it goes to innocent people. Through someone having an irresponsible sexual behaviour and then coming back and sleeping with their wives and their children born out of that procreation relationship also suffer. So it's not because of promiscuity, multiple sleeping partners. These things we can no longer classify these things as private. Unfortunately, there are public consequences to these things, and so of course we regulate what is legal sexual behaviour, not doing it with animals, not doing it with parents or children or siblings, and not doing it with the same gender. There are real medical reasons that have always been there, always been documented in history, which have led to some level of civilization. We don't want to be uncivilized in one area. We police the roads, we police the business, we police or regulate the film industry, and we have to regulate the internet and regulate people's sexual choices. Now, if we legalize same-sex relationships, the problem is also that everyone suffers because of robbing people en masse of platonic relationships. What I mean by platonic relationships is there is a freedom in India. Guys, after a football match, they hug each other when they win, and girls will go on an NSS or NCC camp and be in the same tent, and there's no suspicion, they're fully confident amongst the same gender relationships. They're not thinking, the boy doesn't think about a boy, does he fancy me? The girl doesn't think about the girl sleeping next to her in the NSS NCC camp, does she fancy me? Are they attracted? Because, by the nature of things and by keeping this away from public view, we're thinking, well, no, this is not an issue. We have a platonic relationship here. We have to be a little bit distant from people of the opposite gender. But the same gender, we have freedom not to keep distance, because basically there's no chance of that mutual attraction while it's illegal. And even if it's there, it's restrained and kept as a minimum, so we're not worrying about it because it's such a low percentage. However, if we publicise this stuff, if we make it legal, all sorts of films, when in the West we have continuous films and comedies about same-gender relationships, ignoring the health implications, advertising these sorts of things, and you go and babysit for your best friend's son, you tuck him in bed at night and just, you give him a tap on the head, and he says, you're a homosexual. And so, we have to keep distance from children because of all the paedophilia that's increasing, and we have to keep distance from the same gender. And so friendship en masse is harmed. Then there's the whole issue of what do we do with bathrooms? After legalizing it in 2015 in America, 2014 in France, Ireland and Britain, all these countries now, there's lawsuits going on. Should homosexuals or transgender people, and transgendered in the West is different to transgendered in in India. I'm not talking about eunuchs and people that have a mixture of gender organs, talking about people who have 100% anatomy one gender but feel that they're another gender, which traditionally is classified as a mental issue rather than an issue of truth. So they filed cases that the homosexuals or transgender males want to go into ladies' bathrooms because they feel that they're a girl. So the 16-year-old is changing, the 21-year-old is breastfeeding her daughter in the ladies' bathrooms, and the homosexual men want to be able to go in there because they feel they're a girl and go in there. Well, it's causing a lot of problems. You know, the hospital wards where, you know, of course they have a curtain, but sometimes with all the pipes and lying down, you know, it's an all-ladies wards, and people feel more comfortable. You know, again, I gave the example of an NSS camp. Well, which tent do you put people in who have the opposite orientation? You know, if we believe in our PUC students or Year 10 students going on a camp and having separate places in the night, we keep them separate because we don't want our children engaging in these activities, then if there are people with reversed orientation or homosexual boys, which tent do you put them in? You can't put them in the girls' tent. The girls may like them. You can't put them in the boys' tent. If they want to be free, be legalized, be open about practicing their choice of relationship, it's just not going to work. Either side, there's going to be open to temptation. Now, there's a big argument today that, well, if someone's born a homosexual, they can't change. Well, the Jewish psychologist Dr. Robert Spritzer, who declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder for America in 1973, cheered on by the homosexual community, recently documented many homosexuals who changed their orientation from homosexual to heterosexual through reorientation therapy, to the horror of the homosexual community. So, you know, some people who are clearly open to homosexuality, like the president of the Psychology Association in America, Dr. Robert Spritzer, he himself documented. And there's much research done on people who happily having children who were perhaps bisexual and then decided to curb that aspect. You know, even if people are born that way, someone that's a rapist can't make an excuse, well, I raped, but I was born that way. Someone who's a paedophile can't say, well, I'm naturally attracted to children, so don't judge me, don't criminalize this. You know, we naturally maybe... No, or don't criminalize this. Don't criminalize this. Don't criminalize this. Social implications that are negative, and so we use the comparison. We are civilized. Every area of humanity, we are different to animals. We don't just go with our emotions, we go with our conscience, with our minds. And when things are en masse, have destructive forces to a nation, then we have to have a common consent, a law which criminalizes such activities. Now, even if homosexuals can't change their orientation, they still can change their behaviour. We expect paedophiles to change theirs. Are people who rape exonerated as they could not control themselves? No. And people that say they're born that way, well, no one's born homosexual or heterosexual. They're born male or female. When they're 11, 12, they're on their hormones. They have an orientation one way or the other. People say, is it nature or is it nurture? Well, you see, we now know that what we are is determined by our genes. What we are is determined by our genetic makeup. And we can have identical twins with exactly the same genes. One is straight, one is gay. One is homosexual, one is heterosexual. And so that proves that it's not to do with their genetic state because they have identical genes. So it seems to be nurture rather than nature. For example, there's so many documented cases of very poor, we feel sorry for them, and they have a really hard time. You know, people that were abused as a child and by an uncle or something, and they began to despise their gender, and they transitioned into a reversed orientation, someone that is attracted to someone of the same gender. So this is a well-documented reason, one of the reasons. There's obviously others. We're born to desire to have fun, but that's not an excuse for alcoholism. We're born with desire for peace, but that's not an excuse for taking lots of drugs. It's illegal for a woman to have 2 husbands. The state must interfere with that to bring protection. We're not against anyone who's struggling with these emotions. Personally, in my own team, we have people working in some cities with eunuchs or people that have mixed gender organs, and trying to get them out of their prostitution trade because they know they're going to live very short life with that type of behaviour. And we really care for them and want to get them jobs and give them homes. Let's just think of this famous homosexual, Alan Turing. He was the guy who cracked the Nazi Enigma code. That was during World War II. The Nazis, or the Germans who were Nazis at that time, spread their war information where they should attack through this code, which was a semi-computer that they sort of used, a machine, and it couldn't be cracked for years. And they got the top mathematicians and scientists, they couldn't crack it. They changed it every day, the Nazis. And even though they got the Enigma machine, they still couldn't crack it. They didn't know the code. So Alan Turing, who was a homosexual, he was brilliant. He was an amazing mathematician. And he made the first fully functioning computer, which broke the Enigma. He cracked the Enigma code. And though someone else invented the computers, his was the first fully functioning one that had a massive international impact, like, say, Microsoft Windows today and all the computers, the laptops and the tabs that we use, mobile phones. So his was the first fully functioning one. And in cracking the code, it was estimated that he shortened World War II by 2 years, because they intercepted so many things, and they could do the invasion of Europe in a different place to where the Germans were expecting them, the Allied forces, and it was estimated that he saved 14 million lives on both sides. All together from all the different axes and the Allied forces. We don't want to foster persecution of people that struggle with lesbian desires and homosexual desires because of the so much persecution that they've had. They're reacting and they're coming out of the closet and saying, we're proud of our gayness, and instead of being ashamed. And they have a deep rejection and a wound which has caused them to fight for their rights today. And so the purpose of this is not in any way to try and make people be against these people, against their behaviour. Yes, we want to warn people of irresponsible sexual behaviour, but the people themselves are just as valuable, very precious. We want to help them, not hurt them. And there's been many examples that have achieved great things, but we want to speak against this behaviour which people should restrain. Now, it's documented in America. The reason I'm using American statistics is because America legalized not only homosexual marriage but homosexual behavior years and years ago, and therefore people have been emboldened en masse to be honest about their orientation, and therefore we have a full set of statistics. And what we can do in India, we don't have to reduce our youths to laboratory rats in an untried social experiment. We can clearly look at what's gone on in foreign countries and then make wise decisions on policy and education and laws and ethics in this great nation. We don't have to make the same mistakes, and we have documented social implications of the legalization of anal sex. Here's one. A third of all paedophile cases, that's where adults abuse or rape a child, are homosexual in nature. That is man to boy. Now again, because we know that there are approximately 2% of Americans that are homosexual, we can work out, just do a very simple high school maths, to find out that therefore a homosexual is 20 times the chance of becoming a paedophile compared to a heterosexual. So it's a very high risk group of doing child abuse. It's well documented. They're only 2%, and yet they constitute 33% of the paedophile cases. Because the paedophiles, when criminalised, they're open about their sexuality. They say, yeah, we're homosexual, or it was the man to boy. So it's clearly documented and well known. I said earlier that they have an average of 50 sleeping partners. Unfortunately, some of these are minors. That's what we're saying. And so it makes them a high-risk group. In the gay pride marches, which we see coming around the world, the marching with the gay pride was the North America Man-Boy Love Association. Their slogan is 8 too late. In other words, they feel that boys younger than 8 should be able to express themselves sexually with older men. And this is what they're now arguing for. They're arguing to legalise paedophilia, to lower the age of consent, which of course is not accepted in most countries. Now, the question is, if we legalise a homosexual's behaviour, and then soon after, as has been documented in most countries, the legalising of homosexual marriage, then we're saying people can marry two men. Well, they can't have their own children, it's impossible. But if they're married, it gives them the legal rights to adopt children. And these are a very high-risk group for being tempted to abuse the children. So, using an extreme comparison, would we allow ISIS to Islamic State of Syria to adopt our children or to babysit our children? No one would take people that are killing children in the Middle East, extreme terrorists, to adopt their or to babysit for their children, because they'd be a high-risk group. So in the same way, a group of people that are 20 times statistically more likely to be a paedophile, I don't think we should allow them to adopt children, and therefore they shouldn't be allowed to get married. They shouldn't be recognised as a marriage relationship. Now, do they really want marriage? Well, one of the first countries to legalise homosexuality was the Netherlands in 2001. And so they've had 15 years now of legalised homosexual marriage, but only 4% of the homosexual community actually got married. So 96% of them don't want marriage. In fact, you hear them quote, and you look on their websites, and they want sexual liberation, sexual freedom, and many of them find the institution of marriage an outdated thing which they're really against. They don't want commitment. They want to have their, as I said before, 40% of them have hundreds of sleeping partners. They want what they call sexual liberation. And so why are they so trying to legalise homosexuality, legalise homosexual marriage? Again, 17%, Massachusetts was the first state, I believe, in America that legalised homosexual marriage. Only 17%, 83% didn't get married. So they don't want one lifetime sleeping partner. Is it civil rights that they want, or is it more civil acceptance? Again, it's wrong that we reject them. We treated them so badly. Listen to their stories when they've discovered their relationship and how their families and friends hate them. And I don't think what we're doing today is hate. I think what we're doing today is loving and saving many young people who are tempted with this sort of relationship inspired by pornography and the methods that we see in it. We're actually saving them from this 20% suicide. So I don't think this speech today is in any way hatred. I think perhaps the people that suppress the medical facts, some of the LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, gay rights activists who are suppressing the medical implications of this form of anal sex, they are the ones that really hate the homosexual and transgendered community and the youths who are open to trying it out. However, we don't want to suppress these truths, but we cannot give them this civil rights. Say that you're a parent in some years' time, and your 21-year-old son comes to you and say, "Mum, Dad, I want to tell you I'm a homosexual, and this is the guy I'm going to get married. I want to get married to. I'm going abroad to get married to him, and I come back and live with him." Well, the parents may first be in denial, then disgust, but then slowly they will accept it and even celebrate the marriage and decide, well, this is a different century, that's an old law. Well, murder's an old law. Being old doesn't make it outdated. 14 years later, when their son is 35, they bury him, he's died of AIDS. The question is, was it loving for the parents to accept their son? What would be loving is not to hate him, to accept him, he's the son, but not to accept his behaviour. To be firmly saying, we cannot support your relationship, your anal sex. We cannot support a relationship which only has one option and not the normal way of doing it. That parent struggling with how they're going to deal with their homosexual child is exactly the situation India is in today. We're a parent that has to decide whether we want temporary peace or long-term health in our society. Now, some people may say when they listen to this, oh, this guy is homophobic, he's a bigot. Well, when we have debates about the gay rights issue, when people start using insults and resort to name calling, it seems that they've reached the end of their ability to articulate a rational argument. When this came up, whenever this comes up in India and they have a debate, it seems like the gay rights activists don't give the chance for the people with traditional values to even express the facts and talk about this. And what are they afraid of? Why are they afraid of bringing out these arguments? Is it because they don't have rational arguments? And the quick soundbite, the quick words like, oh, you're homophobic, seems to mar the arguments. Well, you see, phobia means a fear. I have a phobia of poisonous snakes and a good phobia of putting my hand into the gas stove when it's lit. Some phobias are good. And we should have a phobia about things which causes 20% suicide. Now, a bigot is someone who has a prejudice that is unjustified, that there's it's based on a lack of information. Opposition to anal sex and oral sex, or relationships which only have that option, like homosexuality, is not bigoted, but is being aware of all the facts and having a genuine concern, not an unjustified bias. So if we understand all the facts, we may come to a conclusion that this is unhealthy for society, for individuals, and we want to encourage people to curb this unacceptable behaviour. The vast majority of India is fortunately against this. Unfortunately, the people who are most against this are either unaware or not talking about it or feel embarrassed. This is a taboo topic to talk about, and so especially in the English medium we have very much less media outlets actually speaking about this. I'm glad the educational system is really wanting to address this medically, scientifically and gently. In the countries where they have legalized homosexuality, as I said before, they make masses of films and it just causes so many people to experiment in this area, and without realizing the implications of what they're doing. Though naturally speaking, they may feel, well, I wouldn't do that. Because of all these films, they're trying it out, and because of porn especially, advertising this form of the relationship, people are emboldened to do things. My female staff talk to the girls so often, and they say their boyfriend says, we will leave you unless you do this. And they're forced into it, and they really don't want to do that. And afterwards, their boyfriend is disappointed because it's not a natural way of doing it, and they leave the girl anyway, and she's devastated. But there's something inside them that naturally says this is wrong. But legalizing it means that the government on the whole is saying it's okay to put your part into someone's rectum or someone's mouth. And no, I'm glad after the Delhi bus gang rape they changed the IPC section 375, 376 and upheld 377. And now in countries where they've legalised this, they then start to teach in primary school that having two mummies, being adopted, having two mummies or having two daddies is okay. They start to teach it en masse, you know. And people, you know, they have to teach it because there's such a natural reaction that there's something strange. There is a medical difference. There's a biological difference, emotional difference between the responsibility of a mother and the responsibility of a father. The father's loving but very strict. The mother is a bit strict but very loving and gracious and gentle. The combination is divine. It is a perfect combination. There are problems in marriage, problem with parents, but this is the best option and it's the least harmful. And many times there's huge advantages. Also in high school they use pin men diagrams to teach this very unhealthy, irresponsible sexual relationship, anal and oral sex. They actually teach it. They are teaching it in the countries where they're legalizing. So they're promoting a suicide method, 20% suicide method. So we don't want to legalize this. If you legalize it today, tomorrow it'll be taught in the classroom in all the movies. There are many advantages of natural marriage between male and female. It civilizes men. How many married men roam in gangs on the streets when they come into marriage and have children? See, that's the difference. When a male and female get married, they have children. That's the natural thing. It replenishes society, refills the country with people as the generations pass away. And it civilizes men because the responsibility. One of my cousins, our family didn't like because he would get angry and hit my cousin's sister, my cousin's husband. And but after he had married, he had 5 children. He became so responsible, he's still committed in marriage. He's a good dad to all the 5 children. Having children civilizes people. The responsibility pushes us, brings the best out of people. You have to serve your children. It's a good thing to have children and serve them. It's a selfish thing to say, no, we want a relationship where we have no children. Children replenish society. It's the safest place for children is in a natural marriage, having a father and a mother. When the father leaves, there's problems. I'll talk about that in a moment. It protects women who will be otherwise more vulnerable to sexual predators. It protects society from the financial cost of divorce and welfare of the children, and extra homes, extra government charities, all the money that's given in to look after single parent mothers, etc. Now, natural marriages have a mum and a dad. Otherwise, they're brought up with 2 dads or 2 mums or a divorced family, and there are implications when dad or mum is not there when the children are being brought up, and usually it's dad that's not there. There are implications. And it's well documented because we have a 50 to 60% divorce rate in the Western countries today. You don't want that in India. You have a 2% divorce rate. Mera Bharat Mahan. And for example, when dad should come every day, he shouldn't just be there on Sunday afternoon for 2 hours. The children despise him. It doesn't work. They put their earphones on, they're not even talking to him. He feels bad, he can't spend time with his children. But what happens is, they go into the prisons, they document all the suicides, and they've asked the question, you know, what was their family background? How can we analyse what's led to their criminal activity? And even Liberal President Obama of the past, he quoted these documented facts. For example, a boy brought up in a non-natural marriage is 4 times more likely to become a rapist, 5 times more likely to commit suicide, 6 times more likely to be long-term in prison, 7 times more likely to drop out of school, to commit murder, to be pregnant as a teenager, 24 times more likely to run away from home. So do we really want average 5 or 6-fold increase in India of suicide and crime, teenage pregnancies and rape and all these other things? Well, if not, then we need to do everything to protect natural marriage, where there's a mum and a dad bringing up their children. Strong marriage frequently requires the sacrifice of your own comfort and the desire for the good of the spouse and the children. With loving sacrifice comes a growth in commitment and maturity. This is the polar opposite of the average homosexual relationship, in which you betray your family's trust, their health and well-being, so you can indulge in more self-gratification. The law is a great teacher. If we change the law, we will increase in these irresponsible, unhealthy activities. When they legalized, liberalized divorce laws in the West, they had a 16-fold increase in divorce and all the devastation, as I've previously outlined. When they made slavery illegal in England and America, now today 99% admit slavery is wrong. When they had slavery, it was okay in the law, it was 50-50. So the law is a great teacher. We have to protect the law because it protects the culture and the superior family values in Indian culture. When I came to India, I changed my name to a Hindustan name, Abhishek, to respect the culture of the land which I'm privileged to work in. Now, there are some arguments, lastly I want to finish off with, for legalizing homosexuality and allowing the actual behaviour and the marriage. Same-sex marriage is about love. Who could be against that? I mentioned this earlier. But what is loving about a medically destructive sexual content? Bleeding, disease, pain. Surely that's not loving. If someone has AIDS but loves another person, is it okay for them to have sex? This would be hate, not love, if they have AIDS and potentially give it to someone they're claiming to love. No. Love does not justify the act unless it's completely healthy. When sex is medically dangerous, the most loving thing to do is not have sex with that person. The next argument people say, you're judging me. Well, you're judging me for not judging you. Your argument is self-defeating. What if I was born with a desire to oppose gay marriage? Then, would that justify it? Homosexuals don't seem to want to have civil rights. They seem to want to have special rights. If you hit an old person, it's one crime, but if you hit a homosexual, it's even more of a crime. Well, how about the freedom of speech? Why aren't we allowed to discuss, honestly, the medical implications of this thing? Why is immediately we're told we're homophobic and not understanding people? Well, perhaps we understand more. All against same-sex marriage, you're under arrest. Excuse me? How about freedom of speech? Shouldn't we be allowed to point these things out? Okay, we should be tolerant. We should be tolerant of other people's sexual choices. All civilized societies are intolerant of destructive behaviors like murder, rape, and theft. And so, we cannot tolerate things like 20% suicide, things that take 14 years of people's life, increase hundreds of times the chances of certain activities, and when there's blood transfusion, it spreads to innocent people or to their spouses and children, as I've already mentioned. The homosexual activists want us to tolerate their behaviour, but they will not tolerate even hearing those who oppose them. They don't tolerate free speech if it's against them. This is a double standard, and it cannot be tolerated. We have to judge everything that harms people. Every law is based on judgment. Unfortunately, homosexual activists are propelling societies towards a premature demise by making the disastrous judgment that we ought not to make judgments about their behaviour. They, of course, can judge our behaviour as immoral when we oppose same-sex marriage, but we are not to judge their behaviour. This is hypocrisy. Do not discriminate. All laws discriminate against harmful behaviours, not against persons. Inter-race marriage is okay, so why can't we have same-gender marriage? Race is benign, sexual habits are benign. there are ex-homosexuals, there are no ex-blacks or ex-whites. Conclusion. When confronted with the truth, some people don't like it and they ignore it or suppress it. They don't acknowledge that their claims are unreasonable, as they are self-defeating or hypocritical. Then they attack the person making the argument rather than the arguments once reason is left behind. An attempt is made to suppress the truth. Ironically, the most intolerant people tend to be those who claim to be fighting for tolerance. Why do homosexual activists always raise their voice in the debate and not give chance for the other arguments to finish? Why do homosexual activists demand that others control their behaviour, who speak out against homosexual behaviour, but refuse to even try to control their own sexual behaviour? Gay bashers, control your behaviour. We don't have to control our behaviour. The double standard is obvious. Let's not mix up people that have mixed organs, like eunuchs, etc., with homosexuals. We don't want false compassion due to emotional affection interfering with sound reasoning. Natural marriage is our natural immune system to keep India healthy. There are reasons, good reasons, for the traditional values. Let India be an example in the world, coming out with good statistics of health that will cause other countries to perhaps reverse their decision on these things when they see the devastating effects on children, individuals, and society en masse. Thank you very much.